Elon Musk's next big project isn't launching another rocket or building a cyber vehicle or planting more chips in our brains. It's actually trying to cut down the size of the government, or at least trying to make it more efficient. Can the world's most productive man, can he actually make an unproductive organization more productive? Let's dive into it.
I have discussed with Trump the idea of a government efficiency commission.
Nice. Yeah.
And I would be willing to be part of that commission.
I would be willing to be part of that commission. And so the DOGE was born, the Department of Government Efficiency.
I wonder how hard that is.
The antibody reaction would be very strong.
Yes. Yeah.
You really have to, you're attacking the Matrix at that point. The Matrix will fight back.
I think that's the biggest thing fighting Elon here is that, yes, he's right, he's fighting the Matrix. Personally, I'm not super convinced that Elon's not part of the Matrix at this point. However, it does seem like he's saying all the right things and supposedly doing all the right things to want to go and make the government better, or at least make the government more for the people. I think, he's tweeting stats, he's tweeting things that kind of highlight how bad the government has gotten over the last decade. And I think he's the man that understands what has to happen in order to change it. And I wonder how much power one ethos, one man, kind of the Elon algorithm can have in order to change that many people, to change a culture across an organization that big. It's going to be interesting.
How unreal is it that it's called DOGE?
Actually, with Elon, it's quite real. I guess I've just, I've accepted Elon as a major political figure in the U.S., but the DOGE committee, the Department of Government Efficiency, is a non-statutory agency that has zero funding that Donald Trump says will advise OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Now, two things. Number one is, as I predicted, DOGE would become a quote-unquote blue ribbon commission. So this is a non-statutory blue ribbon commission that has been given authority to Vivek Ramaswamy and to Elon Musk.
That's actually super interesting because a bunch of unelected officials, giving advice and advisory, theoretically they don't have much power. However, I think that Elon and Vance have quite a bit of power, especially in Trump's eyes. And, having just done a video and obviously you've watched the Get Based documentary about Jekyll Island by now, it's kind of giving some modern day Jekyll Island vibes here.
Secondary, their recommendations to government should be complete by July of 2026, according to the press release released by Trump. First of all, what that will mean is they're probably going to need private funding to even set all this up. That's great, not a problem for Elon. But you're basically going to be able to have to commission GAO reports, Government Accountability Office, and other reports and fact-finding missions across the government, which is fantastic. Trump can even empower you to go through to every agency and to collect figures. None of it matters one iota if Republican appropriators in the House of Representatives care what you have to say. Historically, they don't give a shit what the executive office has to say. So every year, the president releases his own budget. It used to mean something, but in the last decade or so, it's become completely meaningless. The House Ways and Means Committee and the People's House are the ones who originate all appropriations and set up spending. So that's one, is that DOGE in and of itself has no power. It has no ability to compel or force people to do anything. Its entire case for being, really, if you think about it mechanically, is to try and convince and provide a report to Republican legislators to be able to cut spending. So that's that.
So I think that the original take here, the initial take here is that the DOGE can't really be effective because it's too decentralized and it has so little power. Personally, I think this is what makes DOGE so exciting. And I think that we should actually kind of push more government to act in this way, more as an advisory case and less as an all-sweeping hand powerful case. But, to Sagar's point, I think that it is going to prove to be quite difficult to get anything done, especially in there's a 4-year term here. This is Trump's second term. There's a cap to how much can actually get done here. And 4 years, not that long.
Number two is the figures that Elon is throwing out there. I want to give them some advice because people do not understand federal government spending. The absolute vast majority of government spending is entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, which are untouchable under Donald Trump and their most politically popular programs in the world, and military spending. Discretionary non-military spending, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, is a very, very small part of the federal budget. Now, within that small slice, About 90% of that 8 is bipartisan and is supported by like everybody. NOAA, the hurricane guys, like people like that. People who are flying into the eye of the hurricane, people who are government inspectors of X, Y, and Z. The parts that are controversial that you're actually able to touch, things like welfare programs, like food stamps, is an extraordinary small slice. So what's the number he put out there? 5 trillion, something like that. There is only one way to do that. And realistically, under the current thing, you have to radically change the entire way that the Pentagon buys everything.
So, to be fair, if there is someone that's going to radically change the way something is done, it's probably going to be Elon, the man that has radically changed space travel, radically changed electric vehicles, is radically changing AI, radically changed, the way that we do chips and brains. What do you even call it? Neuralink. I would hazard a guess that he is going to go in with a giant radical change. However, again, will the government accept such a radical change?
Elon actually does have the background to be able to accomplish this because he has had to wrangle with SpaceX and the bullshit that Boeing has been pulling for over a decade. But I really want everybody's expectations to be very set around this. Just remember, non-statutory, blue ribbon. So if he's serious about it, I just laid out all of these hurdles that he's going to have to overcome. And I'm not saying him and Vivek aren't serious dudes, but you got to really know the system to be able to accomplish this.
That's a good point about knowing the system and understanding kind of where to push and where to fight. But I think that this is what makes Elon and Vivek probably the best options for it. I mean, you've got Vivek, who is a politician at the end of the day and understands the system, understands the government the way it's going to be. You have Trump in there, who's also going to probably want to change things up, probably want to leave a splash for his last term, and also isn't afraid to kind of go anti-government, isn't afraid to go anti-politics, where you've got these career politicians that are just so, they're so stuck inside. You can't see the forest through the trees, so to speak. They're way too close to the government to be able to actually look at how it needs to change from 100,000 feet. So you look at Elon's algorithm, question everything, question every requirement. Can you imagine a government just even changing that culture in the government will be a massive form of success for the DOGE, because understanding that most of the government's stuff is inefficient or bad or worst evil is probably a good place to start from. And I think that's going to be the place that Elon's starting with.
What is the sort of the most successful thing that can be pulled off?
The most successful thing they could do is, right now, I think they're really obsessed with designing cuts, right? And identifying cuts. I would redesign systems of procurement.
Boom. That's the right move. Redesigning systems. Forget cuts. Cuts will happen naturally. Cuts are the second step. You need to redesign. You need to look at everything from a first principle approach. Why do we want this here? Why is this important? And if you're not willing to look and evaluate every single process under a government system, I don't think DOGE can be successful.
I would redesign the way that we have processes in place to dispense taxpayer dollars.
I love how they say it's taxpayer dollars. Like, there's a world where this is actually not taxpayer dollars, because this is not driven, government spending is not driven from taxes. It's driven from printing. And I think that we need to think about it. It's even one step deeper than taxpayer dollars. This is the taxpayers' grandchildren's dollars. This is the prosperity of the future generations. Governments need to be held to a much higher standard. We say taxpayer dollars. That term has almost been a little bit like diminished as to what it means. We need to understand that this is the future generations' dollars. We are printing this money in order to spend it on something. It better be really, really, really useful and benefit the future generations, not just some flash in the pan, need to get election votes.
The truth is that appropriations itself, again, are set by the United States Congress. But the way that those appropriations are spent by the government, the executive, has some discretionary authority. So your ability as the executive to be a good steward of the taxpayer money and to redesign a system, which I actually think Elon could be good at this, and Vivek too, in terms of their entrepreneurial spirit, is the entire Pentagon procurement thing. It needs to be burned to the ground. Number one, it's bad for the Pentagon. It gives them substandard equipment. It rewards very old weapon systems and programs and thinking that can be easily defeated by people who are studying that for vulnerabilities. The perfect example is all of this drone warfare in Ukraine and in Russia. I mean, drone warfare costs almost nothing. And yet drone swarms and hypersonic missiles pose huge dangers to US systems, which cost more than hundreds of billions of dollars. So my point is that giving nimble procurement and systemic change in the way that we think about executing the mission that Congress does give you actually could save the most amount of money in the long run.
That's a strong take. Just again, why does this exist? And how do we make that as good as possible? Having that single dialed in mission.
The problem again, though, is swing state people who need to get reelected, they need to do one thing. They need to deliver for their district. They need to run on stuff. And nobody has ever run on cutting money for your state. They have run on bringing money to your state. And that's why earmarks and a lot of these other things are extraordinarily popular in Congress, is because it's such an easy way to show constituents how you're working for them whenever it does come re-election time.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, in lies the problem with democracy as it sits today. We have a 4-year election cycle, and at the end of the day, all the senators, all the politicians care about is getting reelected. And as he said, we've got a high time preference society that doesn't win votes on taking money away. It's like trying to take sugar away from a child. You know it's bad for them in the long term. You had a high time preference parenting. The government is like a high time preference parent. And I don't know that the DOGE can necessarily solve the entire democratic state as it exists.
It's a very difficult system. And I also want to tell people who are frustrated by this, I share your frustration, but the system is designed to work this way. And for 2 centuries, the Senate has stood as a bulwark against literally every popular change. And because of that, it's designed to make sure that it's so popular for long enough that it has to become inevitable before the status quo can change. That's really, really frustrating, but you should take comfort in that it's always been that way.
Oof. You should take comfort that it's always been that way. I think just before we wrap this up, I want to ask you guys, obviously, what do you think? What is the most successful thing that Elon can do, that the DOGE can do, Elon and Vivek, in order to make this successful, in order to kind of set the path to kind of move it forward? And are we just putting all this trust and power into a centralized individual, into one small group of people that we're hoping will make the change? I want to leave you guys with a story based on what he just said, what Cigar just said at the end there. And it's a story about a man going to Christmas dinner, how fitting, at his new wife's house. So they go to Christmas dinner, and he notices his mother-in-law cutting the ham in half before it goes into the pot. And he goes to his wife, and he's like, what's with the ham getting cut in half before it goes into the pot? She's like, I don't know, go ask mom. And so he goes, talks to the mom, and he's like, what's up with the ham getting cut in half before you get in there? And she's like, I don't know, go ask grandma. And he's like, Grandma, what's with the ham thing getting cut before it goes in the pot? And she's like, oh, my mom used to do that because we couldn't afford a pot that fit the ham. And I think it goes to show that for 3 generations, this family's been cutting the ham, not because it was better, not because it was the best way to do things, not because it made the perfect ham, but just because it's what we've always done. And if we refuse to reevaluate, if we refuse to look at everything we're doing under the lens of, I have new information, I have new skills, I have new resources, how should I act? I think we're doomed. I think that you and I need to raise the next generation, need to look at our society, look at our world, and constantly be asking ourselves, why are we doing this? Why do we act in this way? How can we take what we have, what we know today, and act better? So with that, I will say thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. Share this with your friends and ask them the question, what can the DOGE do to be successful in your mind? Stay sovereign.